The kitchen clock read 11:47 p.m. when I found Vivian sitting at our mahogany dining table, a single sheet of paper positioned precisely in front of her, like evidence at a trial. The overhead light cast harsh shadows across her face, making her look like a stranger. After 18 years of marriage, maybe that's exactly what she'd become. "Malcolm," she said, without looking up. Her voice carried that practiced tone she used during university board meetings. "We need to talk." I poured myself a scotch from the cabinet, Macallan 18, a wedding gift from her father that we'd been saving for special occasions. Tonight felt special enough. The amber liquid caught the light as I settled into the chair across from her, noting how she'd chosen the head of the table. Power positioning. Classic Vivian. "I've been thinking about us," she continued, finally meeting my eyes. "About where we are, where we're going." She touched the paper with her fingertips. "I've written some things down. 15 points, actually. Reasons why I think we should separate." The scotch burned less than her words. I'd suspected something was coming. The late nights at the university, the hushed phone calls, the way she'd started dressing differently. But hearing it laid out so clinically, like a business proposal, hit differently than I'd expected. 15, I repeated, taking another sip. "That's thorough." "I want to be clear about my reasoning," she said. "I owe you that much honesty." Honesty. Rich word coming from someone who'd been lying for months. But I gestured for her to continue, curious to hear how she'd justify what was coming. She lifted the paper with both hands, like a prosecutor reading charges. Point 1. We've grown apart emotionally. We barely talk anymore beyond logistics and schedules. True enough, though she'd been the one pulling away first. Point 2. Our physical intimacy has become practically non-existent. Also true, though she'd been the one turning away in bed for the past year. Point 3. You've become complacent about your appearance and health. I glanced down at my slightly expanded waistline, 42 years old and carrying maybe 15 extra pounds. Guilty as charged, Your Honor. She continued through her list with methodical precision. My lack of ambition in my IT consulting business. My failure to support her career advancement at the university. My boring conversational topics. My predictable routines. My inadequate social skills at faculty parties. My insufficient romantic gestures. By point 12, I was genuinely impressed by the thoroughness of her documentation. She'd clearly been taking notes for months, building her case like the administrator she was. Points 13 and 14 covered my financial contributions, apparently insufficient despite my covering the mortgage, utilities, and most household expenses while she banked her university salary. Point 15, she said, her voice softening slightly. I don't feel like the woman I'm meant to be when I'm with you. I need space to rediscover myself. She set the paper down and folded her hands. I think a trial separation would be best for both of us. I've already spoken to a realtor about renting a small apartment near campus. I can be out by the weekend. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Outside, October wind rattled the windows of our 1920s craftsman home, the house I'd bought before we married, the house she'd insisted on renovating with my money, the house where she'd apparently been planning her exit strategy. Well? She asked. Aren't you going to say anything? I finished my scotch and stood up slowly. Actually, I have something for you too. Walking to my study, I retrieved the manila folder I'd been keeping in my desk drawer for the past 6 months. The folder my attorney had prepared. The folder containing documents Vivian had apparently forgotten about. I returned to the kitchen and placed a single sheet of paper in front of her. Her face went pale as she recognized the letterhead. Remember this? I asked. The prenuptial agreement you insisted we sign before the wedding? The one you said would protect both of us? Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the document. I watched her eyes scan the text she'd apparently forgotten. or hoped I'd forgotten. Section 4.2, I said helpfully. In the event of divorce or separation, each party retains all assets held prior to marriage, plus any assets acquired individually during marriage. Section 4.3, no alimony shall be paid by either party to the other. The paper slipped from her fingers. Section 4.4 is particularly interesting, I continued. Any jointly held assets acquired during marriage shall be distributed based on documented financial contribution. Since I have records showing I've paid approximately 87% of all joint expenses over 18 years, that works out favorably for me. Malcolm, the house is mine, Vivian. Bought it 3 years before I met you. The investment accounts are mine. I can show you the statements if you'd like. Your car is leased in my name. Even your precious art collection was purchased with my money, though I have receipts showing you selected the pieces. She was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. You can't be serious. Oh, but I am. You see, while you were composing your 15-point manifesto, I was having some interesting conversations with 3 different divorce attorneys. Did you know that in Maine, adultery can affect property division even when there's a prenup, especially when the cheating spouse has been using joint funds to finance the affair? The color drained completely from her face. How did you... The Marriott charges on our joint credit card? The ones that coincided with Professor Lucas Gentry's conference schedule? The lingerie purchases from Victoria's Secret that I never saw you wear? The sudden interest in yoga classes that don't exist at the gym you supposedly attend? I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo I'd taken 2 days earlier. Her BMW parked outside Lucas's apartment complex at 2:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. Time-stamped and geo-tagged. You wanted honesty, Vivian. Here's some honesty. I've known about your affair for 4 months. I've documented everything. Hotel receipts, text messages you forgot to delete, credit card statements showing purchases for your boyfriend. My attorney has it all. She tried to speak, but no words came out. So here's my counter-proposal to your 15 points, I said, sitting back down and pouring another scotch. 1 point, you can leave anytime you want, tonight if you prefer. But you'll leave with exactly what you brought into this marriage 18 years ago, which, if memory serves, was about $12,000 in student loan debt and a Honda Civic with a blown transmission. The transformation was immediate and complete. The confident administrator who delivered her carefully prepared presentation vanished, replaced by someone who looked genuinely terrified. Malcolm, please, we can work this out. I made mistakes, but... Mistakes? I laughed, and it came out harder than I intended. Vivian, you didn't make mistakes. You made choices, calculated, deliberate choices. You planned this whole thing right down to your dramatic 15-point presentation. The only thing you didn't plan for was the possibility that I might not be the pushover you thought I was. She reached across the table toward me. I don't want a divorce. I was confused, going through something. Too late. I stood up and walked to the kitchen counter, where I'd left another manila folder. Separation papers, already filed with the court as of this afternoon. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. You filed already? But You just what? Just told me you wanted to leave? Vivian, I've been waiting for this conversation for months. I knew it was coming. I could see it in every look, every excuse, every lie. The only surprise was how long it took you to work up the courage. I'll fight this, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. With what money? Your university salary won't cover a decent attorney, and as of tomorrow morning, you'll be removed from all joint accounts. Per the prenup you insisted on, remember? I walked to the front door and opened it. Cold October air rushed into the house. You wanted to rediscover yourself, Vivian. Congratulations. You're about to get that chance. She didn't leave that night. Instead, Vivian spent the next 3 days in what I can only describe as a controlled panic, making phone calls and researching attorneys she couldn't afford. I watched her scramble with the detached interest of someone observing an ant farm, fascinating in its predictability. On Thursday morning, she cornered me in the kitchen while I was making coffee. "I spoke to Jennifer Morrison," she said. Jennifer was her closest friend at the university, another administrator who'd always treated me like hired help at faculty gatherings. "She says you're being vindictive, that no judge would enforce such a harsh prenup. Jennifer Morrison is an expert in student affairs, not family law," I replied, adding cream to my mug. "But she's welcome to her opinion. Malcolm, be reasonable. 18 years of marriage has to count for something." "It does count. It counts as 18 years of me supporting your career, your lifestyle, and apparently your boyfriend. What exactly do you think you're entitled to?" She sat down across from me, attempting the vulnerable approach. "I know I hurt you. I know I made terrible choices, but destroying my life won't make you feel better." "I'm not destroying anything, Vivian. I'm simply declining to continue subsidizing your life. There's a difference." My phone buzzed with a text from Cameron Foster, my old college roommate, who now ran a small private investigation firm in town. "Got those photos you wanted. Hotel parking lot, 3 different dates, your wife's BMW, same spot each time, license plate clearly visible." I showed Vivian the message. "Cam's been very helpful these past few months. Did you know the Marriott has security cameras in their parking garage? Amazing what you can accomplish with a simple records request." "You hired a private investigator?" "I hired a friend who happens to be a private investigator. Cam's rates are very reasonable, especially when he's documenting adultery for divorce proceedings." She buried her face in her hands. "I never meant for it to go this far." "What did you mean, exactly? To keep both of us on the hook indefinitely? String me along while you figured out if Professor Gentry was worth the trade?" "It wasn't like that." "Then enlighten me. What was it like?" She looked up, and for a moment I saw something that might have been genuine remorse. "I felt invisible, like I was disappearing into this routine, this life that didn't feel like mine anymore. Lucas made me feel seen, appreciated. And lying to me for months, spending our money on hotel rooms, planning your dramatic exit speech, that made you feel appreciated too?" "I was going to tell you about Lucas after we separated. I didn't want to hurt you more than necessary." I almost laughed. "Vivian, you wrote a 15-point presentation on why I'm inadequate as a husband. You think finding out about your affair would have hurt more than that?" She had no answer for that. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued. "You're going to pack your personal belongings, clothes, books, whatever you actually owned before we married. Everything else stays. The furniture you picked out with my money, the art you bought with my credit cards, the jewelry I gave you for anniversaries and birthdays, all of it stays." "That's not fair." "Fair?" Now I did laugh. "You want to talk about fair? Fair would be me filing for divorce 4 months ago when I first found out about your affair. Fair would be me demanding reimbursement for every dollar you spent on your boyfriend. Fair would be me telling everyone at the university exactly why our marriage ended instead of letting you control the narrative." Her eyes widened. "You wouldn't. Try me. I have documentation, Vivian. Photos, receipts, text messages. I can prove everything. The question is whether you want this to be a quiet separation or a public scandal." The threat hit home. Her position at the university meant everything to her. The status, the social connections, the carefully cultivated image of success. A public adultery scandal would destroy all of that. "What do you want from me?" she asked quietly. "Nothing. That's the point. I want nothing from you except for you to leave. Take your clothes, take your car, which I'll transfer to your name along with the remaining lease payments, and go build that new life you're so eager to discover." "Malcolm, please. I'll end things with Lucas. We can try counseling." "No." The word came out harder than I intended. "You don't get to hurt me this badly and then decide you want to work things out because the alternative is inconvenient for you." She started crying then, not the calculated tears she'd used during arguments over the years, but genuine sobs that shook her whole body. A year ago, maybe even 6 months ago, those tears would have broken my resolve. Now they just made me tired. "I'm going to work," I said, standing up. "I suggest you start packing." Word travels fast in a college town, especially when it involves faculty drama. By Friday afternoon, my phone was buzzing with calls and texts from people I hadn't heard from in months. The story was spreading, though not quite the way Vivian had probably hoped. Cameron Foster stopped by my office around 5 o'clock, carrying 2 beers and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who'd done good work. "Thought you might need these," he said, setting the bottles on my desk. "Heard through the grapevine that your soon-to-be ex-wife has been making the rounds, trying to drum up sympathy." "How's that working out for her?" "About as well as you'd expect. Turns out people aren't as fond of her as she thought. My wife Anita heard some interesting things at the grocery store today." Anita Foster ran the most popular bar in town and had her finger on the pulse of local gossip better than any newspaper. If Anita was hearing things, the whole town would know by Sunday. Such as Professor Gentry isn't exactly popular with his colleagues either. Apparently he's got a reputation for inappropriate relationships with graduate students. Your wife isn't his first affair with a married woman. I opened my beer and leaned back in my chair. Vivian always did have excellent taste in men. "There's more. Remember Dr. Elaine Harwood, your wife's boss?" I nodded. Dr. Harwood was the university's vice president of student affairs, a sharp-tongued woman in her 60s who'd always struck me as someone who collected information the way other people collected stamps. Turns out, Dr. Harwood has been documenting some questionable expense reports from your wife's department. Conference travel that doesn't match actual conference schedules, hotel stays that seem excessive for the stated business purpose. She's been building a file. Interesting timing. Very interesting. Anita thinks Dr. Harwood was waiting for the right moment to act. Your separation might have just given her the opening she needed. I took a long drink of beer and considered this development. Vivian's affair wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a professional liability. If the university started investigating her expense reports, they'd find exactly what I'd found: a pattern of using business travel as cover for personal activities. "There's something else," Cam continued. "I did some digging on Professor Gentry's finances. The man's broke, Malcolm. 3 months behind on rent, maxed out credit cards, student loan payments he can't make. Whatever your wife thought she was trading up to, she's in for a rude awakening." "How broke?" "Adjunct professor broke. No tenure track, no benefits, teaching composition classes to freshmen for barely above minimum wage. He's been living off credit and hope, probably figured your wife was his ticket to financial stability." The irony was perfect. Vivian had risked everything for a man who had less to offer than I did on my worst day. My phone rang. Jennifer Morrison, Vivian's friend from the university. "Malcolm, I think you're being unreasonable," she said, without preamble. "Vivian made mistakes, but she's devastated. Can't you find some way to work this out?" "Jennifer, did Vivian mention that she's been having an affair for months?" Silence. "Did she mention that she's been using joint funds to pay for hotel rooms with her boyfriend? Or that she wrote out a 15-point list of my inadequacies before bothering to mention she wanted a divorce?" "She said you two had grown apart. We grew apart because she was growing toward someone else. There's a difference. But 18 years of marriage that she was ready to throw away for an adjunct professor who can't pay his rent. Jennifer, I appreciate your loyalty to Vivian, but you don't have all the facts." I hung up and looked at Cam. "How many people know about Gentry's financial situation?" "Enough. His landlord's been complaining to anyone who'll listen about the unpaid rent. The man's facing eviction." "And Vivian doesn't know this?" "Doesn't seem like it. She's been living in a fantasy where Professor Poetry is going to sweep her away to a better life. Reality's going to hit hard." I finished my beer and made a decision. "Cam, I need you to do one more thing for me." Saturday evening, I drove to Murphy's Pub, the bar where Anita Foster held court and half the town came to drink and gossip. I'd called ahead to make sure certain people would be there. including Professor Lucas Gentry, who apparently spent most weekends drowning his sorrows in cheap whiskey. The bar was crowded, filled with the usual mix of university people and locals. I spotted Gentry immediately, sitting alone in a corner booth, looking like a man who'd recently received some very bad news. Cam had been busy. I bought a beer and walked over to his table. "Professor Gentry? I'm Malcolm Reed, Vivian's husband." He looked up with the bleary eyes of someone who'd been drinking for hours. "Oh, shit. Mind if I sit down? I think we should talk." He gestured weakly at the empty seat across from him. Up close, he looked younger than his 39 years, with the soft features of someone who'd never had to fight for anything. His clothes were expensive, but wrinkled, his hair unwashed. This was Vivian's great love? "I suppose you want to hit me or something," he said. "Not really. I'm curious, though. What exactly did you think was going to happen here?" He blinked slowly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, did you think Vivian was going to leave me and you two would ride off into the sunset? Did you discuss the practical details of that plan?" We talked about being together after she left you. And how were you planning to support her? On your adjunct salary?" His face flushed. "That's temporary. I'm working on my book. I have applications out for tenure-track positions." "Lucas, can I call you Lucas? You're 3 months behind on rent. Your credit cards are maxed out. You're teaching freshman composition for $1,200 a class. What book? What tenure-track applications?" He stared at me like I'd slapped him. "How do you know about my rent?" "Small town. People talk. Your landlord's been very vocal about your financial situation." The truth was sinking in, and I could see it in his eyes. He'd been living in the same fantasy as Vivian, imagining a future that had no basis in reality. "She doesn't know, does she?" I continued. "About your money problems. You've been letting her think you're a successful academic with prospects." "I am successful. You're a 39-year-old adjunct professor who can't pay his bills. Lucas, I make more money in a month than you make in a year. What exactly were you offering her?" He finished his drink and signaled for another. "She said she was unhappy, that you didn't appreciate her." "And you thought you were saving her?" Something like that. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Here's the thing, Lucas. Vivian is about to discover some uncomfortable truths about her situation. She's going to be looking for someone to blame, someone to support her, someone to make everything okay. Are you prepared to be that person?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, she's about to lose her house, her financial security, possibly her job. She's going to need a place to live, money for food and rent, emotional support while she rebuilds her life. Can you provide those things?" He was quiet for a long moment. "She's losing her job?" "The university is investigating some irregularities in her expense reports. Travel expenses that don't match conference schedules, hotel stays that seem excessive for business purposes. They're taking a very close look at how she's been spending university money." His face went pale. "They'll find out about us. They'll find out she's been using business travel as cover for personal activities. Yes. Whether they connect that to you specifically depends on how thorough their investigation is." Jesus Christ. He put his head in his hands. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "What did you mean to happen, Lucas? Really?" "I don't know. I thought she was sophisticated, successful. I thought being with her would help my career somehow." And there it was. He hadn't fallen in love with Vivian. He'd fallen in love with what he thought she could do for him. Two people using each other, both operating on completely false assumptions. "She's not going to be sophisticated and successful much longer," I said. "She's going to be unemployed and broke. Still interested?" He didn't answer, but he didn't need to. The answer was written all over his face. I stood up and dropped a 20 on the table. "Drinks are on me, Professor. Enjoy the rest of your evening." Walking away, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because I'd hurt him, though I had, but because I'd finally seen the situation clearly. Vivian hadn't left me for someone better. She'd left me for someone weaker, someone she thought she could control and manipulate. The joke was on both of them. Monday morning brought the call I'd been expecting. Vivian, crying and barely coherent, begging me to meet her for coffee. "Please, Malcolm, something terrible has happened. I need to talk to you." I agreed to meet her at the campus coffee shop, curious to see how much of the truth she'd discovered. I arrived first and chose a table near the back, away from the main traffic flow but still visible to anyone who might be watching. She walked in, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her clothes wrinkled, her makeup smeared. The confident administrator was gone, replaced by someone who looked genuinely broken. "Thank you for coming," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "What's the terrible thing that happened, Vivian?" "Dr. Harwood called me into her office this morning. They're investigating my expense reports. They think I've been falsifying travel claims." "Have you been?" She looked at me like I'd asked if water was wet. "You know I have. You know about the hotels, the conferences I didn't actually attend. They have credit card records, Malcolm. They can prove everything. And they're suspending me pending investigation. With pay for now, but if they find evidence of fraud..." She started crying again. "I could lose everything. My job, my pension, my reputation." I sipped my coffee and waited for her to continue. "It gets worse," she said. "I went to Lucas's apartment after the meeting. His landlord was there, changing the locks. He's been evicted, 3 months behind on rent. Where is Lucas now? I don't know. He's not answering his phone. His department head said he won't be getting his contract renewed for next semester. Apparently there have been complaints about his conduct with students." The dominoes were falling exactly as I'd expected. "So what do you want from me, Vivian?" "I want to come home. I want to work this out. I made terrible mistakes, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can..." "No. Malcolm, please. I have nowhere else to go. I can't afford an apartment on my own, especially if I lose my job. My parents are dead. My sister lives across the country. I need help." "You should have thought of that before you decided to blow up our marriage." I was confused. I was going through some kind of midlife crisis. I wasn't thinking clearly. "You were thinking clearly enough to plan your exit strategy. Clearly enough to write out 15 reasons why I wasn't good enough for you. Clearly enough to spend months lying to my face while you figured out if your boyfriend was worth the trade." "He wasn't worth anything." The words came out louder than she intended, drawing stares from other customers. She lowered her voice. "He's nobody. A loser who can't pay his bills or keep a job. I was stupid, Malcolm. Incredibly stupid. Yes, you were. So help me fix this. Let me come home. Let me prove that I've learned from this." I leaned back in my chair and studied her face. She was desperate, genuinely terrified of what her life was about to become. A year ago, that desperation would have moved me. Now, it just seemed like the natural consequence of her choices. "Vivian, do you remember what you said to me that night? About needing space to rediscover yourself?" I was wrong. No, you were right. You do need to rediscover yourself. You need to find out who you are when you're not married to someone who pays your bills and covers your mistakes. You need to learn what you're actually worth in the world. "I can't do this alone." "Sure you can. You're an intelligent, educated woman with professional experience. You'll figure it out." "The university will fire me. I'll be blacklisted from academic administration. No one will hire me." "Then you'll do something else. Retail, food service, administrative work in the private sector. Lots of people make honest livings in those jobs." She stared at me in horror. "You want me to work in retail?" "I want you to work wherever you can get hired. I want you to pay your own rent, buy your own food, make your own way in the world. I want you to experience the independence you said you needed." "This isn't independence, Malcolm. This is punishment." No, Vivian. Punishment would be me pressing charges for the fraudulent use of joint credit cards. Punishment would be me telling everyone at the university exactly why our marriage ended. Punishment would be me making sure Professor Gentry's new employers know about his history of inappropriate relationships. Her eyes widened. You wouldn't. I don't want to. But if you keep pushing, if you keep trying to manipulate me into taking you back, I might change my mind. I stood up and pulled on my jacket. The separation papers are final in 3 weeks. I suggest you use that time to figure out your next move. Malcolm, wait! But I was already walking away, leaving her alone at the table with her tears and her rapidly shrinking options. 2 weeks later, I was working in my home office when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see Vivian standing on the front porch, holding a single suitcase. She looked thinner than when I'd seen her at the coffee shop, worn down by the reality of her situation. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in. The university fired me, she said without preamble. Dr. Harwood presented evidence of expense fraud going back 2 years. They're demanding restitution of nearly $15,000. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Are you really? I considered the question honestly. I'm sorry it came to this. I'm not sorry you're facing consequences for your choices. I've been staying at the Motel 6 out by the highway. $49 a night, Malcolm. Do you know what that's like? No, I don't. The sheets are stained. The carpet smells like cigarettes and God knows what else. There are people doing drugs in the parking lot. I haven't had a decent meal in a week because I can't afford restaurant food, and the motel doesn't have a kitchen. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know what you've done to me. I want you to understand what your revenge has cost. I stepped out onto the porch and closed the door behind me. Vivian, I didn't do this to you. You did this to yourself. I made mistakes. You made choices. You chose to have an affair. You chose to lie to me for months. You chose to use joint funds to pay for hotel rooms with your boyfriend. You chose to commit expense fraud at your job. Every single consequence you're facing is the direct result of decisions you made. So, you feel nothing? 18 years of marriage and you can just watch me suffer without any compassion at all? The question hit harder than I expected. The truth was, I did feel something, not the satisfaction I'd thought I would, but a kind of hollow sadness for what we'd lost and what she'd become. I feel sorry for you, I said finally, but not sorry enough to let you drag me down with you. I'm not asking you to take me back as your wife. I'm asking you to help me as a human being. Let me stay in the guest room for a few weeks while I figure things out. I'll pay rent as soon as I find work. With what money? You just said you can't afford decent food. I'll find something. Temporary work. Whatever I can get. I just need a little time to get back on my feet. I looked at her standing there with her single suitcase, and for a moment I almost weakened. Then I remembered the 15-point list, the months of lies, the careful planning that had gone into her betrayal. No, Vivian. Please, Malcolm, I'm begging you. I know you are, and a year ago that would have worked. You could always manipulate me with tears and desperation, but you taught me something important about who you really are, and I can't unknow that. What did I teach you? You taught me that you're capable of looking me in the eye and lying without hesitation. You taught me that you're willing to betray 18 years of marriage for someone you barely knew. You taught me that you see our relationship as something you can turn on and off based on your convenience. I opened the front door. You wanted independence, Vivian. You wanted to discover who you are without me. This is your chance. I was wrong. I was stupid and selfish and wrong about everything. Yes, you were. But being wrong doesn't undo the damage. It doesn't give you the right to expect me to fix the mess you made. She stood there for a long moment, tears streaming down her face, and I felt something inside me finally break free. Not my resolve, that had been solid for months, but the last vestige of guilt, the nagging voice that had been whispering that maybe I was being too harsh. "Goodbye, Vivian," I said, and closed the door. I watched through the window as she walked back to her car, not the BMW, which had been repossessed the week before, but a beat-up Honda Civic that probably cost her most of her remaining savings. She sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, crying, before finally starting the engine and driving away. 3 days later, I heard through Anita Foster that Vivian had left town. No forwarding address, no goodbye to her former colleagues, just gone. Lucas Gentry had disappeared around the same time, though whether they left together or separately, nobody knew. I signed the final divorce papers on a cold November morning, sitting in my lawyer's office with a cup of coffee and a sense of completion I hadn't felt in years. 18 years of marriage, reduced to signatures on legal documents. "Any regrets?" my attorney asked as I handed back the signed papers. I thought about it for a moment. "Just one." "What's that?" "I regret that it took me so long to realize who she really was." Walking out of the lawyer's office, I felt the November wind cut through my jacket, sharp and clean. Winter was coming, but for the first time in years, I was looking forward to what came next. My phone buzzed with a text from Cameron Foster. "Drinks tonight? Anita's making her famous chili." I typed back, "Absolutely, I'm buying." For the first time in months, I had something to celebrate. Not Vivian's downfall, that had been painful to watch even when it was necessary, but my own freedom. The freedom to build a life based on honesty instead of manipulation, on mutual respect instead of calculated convenience. Vivian had been right about one thing in her 15-point list. We had grown apart. What she hadn't understood was that I'd grown stronger while she'd grown more selfish. She'd mistaken my kindness for weakness, my loyalty for stupidity. Her biggest mistake wasn't the affair or the lies or even the expense fraud. Her biggest mistake was underestimating me. She'd assumed I would always be there to clean up her messes, to provide the safety net that let her take risks without consequences. She'd assumed wrong. I drove home to my empty house, my house, bought with my money, filled with my things, and poured myself a scotch. The good stuff this time, not saved for special occasions, but enjoyed because I felt like it. Outside, the first snow of winter was beginning to fall, covering the world in clean white silence. Inside, I was finally completely alone, and for the first time in years, alone felt like exactly where I wanted to be.